Good evening, everyone. So first of all, I'd like to thank Kuber and Rhea and especially Ansuman, basically who contacted me and facilitated this say lecture. Um, okay, so whatever actually I will be speaking is basically based on my own experience of doing primary research. I have done a lot of surveys starting from my post graduation days. I had presented a small seminar paper based on a small survey during my post graduation course at Utkal University, Bhubaneswar. And then during MPhil coursework also, a field survey was part of our coursework, and then MPhil dissertation at CDS Trivandrum, and also PhD. So, and then after that, during my own research program, I've done a lot of surveys, and so I will be basically sharing some of my experiences uh, and how to do an effective survey and prepare a good research report or say paper or whatever we think. So we'll be basically okay. So we'll be looking at three things: how, like, why primary research is good or better, and then how to design a questionnaire, and then how to do the survey. And all of you can stop me at any point of time, and you can ask anything. You don't have to wait till the end. We can discuss anything that you feel needs immediate clarification. You can stop me. Otherwise, we can discuss at the end. So we'll be starting with this point, like why primary research is needed at all. And for that, see, I would always say that if secondary data are available, then we must use the secondary data. Okay, and if secondary data is not available, then only we should go for primary survey or primary study. And in India, we have huge amount of secondary data sources, and a lot of resources are used for collecting data and that to make it available in the public domain. For example, NSS data, then census data, NFHS data, and so many other indicators. Like similarly, we have World Development Indicators. RBI provides data. So so many data sets are available, and those are very rich data sets. So if somebody really wants to do a survey, a research, um, secondary data can be used for many things. But still, in some cases, we see that that is not sufficient, and we go for a primary research. So mostly, whenever we go for a primary research, we have a justification that data is not available. Secondary data is not available, and that's why we need to go for a primary survey or a primary study. And so this data unavailability could be for a specific population, it could be for a specific time period, or it could be for specific indicators that you are looking at. So for example, NSS provides huge amount of data sets, but still people go for doing survey. And again, you must be probably aware that NSS covers something around 50,000 to 1 lakh plus households, depending on the round of survey, and whether it is thin round or thick round. And so that means they provide a huge sample. And as principle of statistics says that when your sample size is large, that would really reflect the diversity, and it will be quite representative of the population. So secondary data are available, but still we look at certain other issues which are not covered under the secondary data sources that are available. Similarly, the time period, in fact, in India, most of the time we see that the data comes at a very lag period. As for example, census data, we see that it takes almost 5 to 7 years for the release of the data, final data. Similarly, NSS data also, we see that it takes a lot of time. So, if you want to cover a specific period, then you have to go for primary survey. Similarly, population, if you are looking at a specific population, then NSS data or secondary data, you might be aware that it doesn't allow you to go beyond a limit. So, for example, you cannot do a district level analysis or block level analysis using NSS data. It will permit you only up to region, different regions of different states. So if you want to go to say village level or block level analysis, then secondary data will also not allow you to do that. Your sample doesn't permit that. So you have to do a primary research. Similar indicators, you might be interested in something else, which is again not available in NSS data. So that's why you need to go for primary data. And then it is more flexible in the sense that basically you are trying to prove or test a hypothesis, and some dependent variables and some independent variables you want to examine whether there is some association. And in that case, the existing data set will have a limitation because they would have a specific purpose of collecting the data, but your purpose would be something different. So it would be quite flexible when you would conduct your own survey. But then when you do a primary survey, it comes with a price, and in fact the price is really huge. And so this is in terms of the time that you have to spend, and similarly the money that you have to spend, and the challenges of collecting data. And in fact, we'll be discussing what are the challenges are involved while collecting the data. But time and money is very, very important, because nowadays, when you are doing PhD, if you spend too much of time in doing PhD, then you are basically having a huge opportunity cost. See, like as I am aware that some students of St. Stephen's College get good campus placements after even completing BA. And now if you are spending a lot of time on PhD, say 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, then that means your opportunity cost is too high. So you can't really wait that long time. So you need to finish your PhD within a limited time. And that is why you cannot do survey of a very large sample. So you have to finish it within time. And then money also is involved. Of course, you might be getting scholarship. In some cases, you might get a grant. But then money is again limited. So you cannot go for a large sample like NSS collects 95,000 or 1 lakh households survey you cannot do. So it will not be quite representative. So time, money, and other challenges of data collection are the constants. So that also you have to take care. That is why I would always suggest that if you can do your thesis using secondary data, that is always good. But still, if you feel that secondary data is not appropriate and you are not getting those indicators, then only you go for doing a primary survey. And in fact, for your information, in India, NSS data and census data are not fully explored. We spend so much of resources for collecting data, and we are not actually able to utilize those data sources. Reasons might be that it comes quite late, and there are also certain limitations. But then still, those are underexplored. We can explore and do a lot of research, very good research using the secondary data. And some people claim that the primary data is more reliable and secondary data is not trustworthy. Some people claim this. I don't actually buy this argument, because your primary data is as unreliable as the secondary data. Okay? Because even if you are trying your best, you will not be able to get the real data. Okay? Because so nobody would love to share the original information. Nobody. And again, for your information, most of the time we try to survey the unprivileged section of the society, and we never survey the privileged section of the society. And if you try to do that, probably the privileged section of the society will never entertain you. Okay, I know. In fact, if you try to do a survey in a very posh area of say Delhi or any capital city, nobody will entertain you. Okay, and so most of the time we do a survey for the unprivileged people, and when we do that, actually, when you do a survey for those sections of the society, there is some expectation that when you are doing a survey, people would always expect that what would be the immediate benefit of that survey, and so with that expectation, they would be providing you the information, and that is why I would say that uh, every data set has its own limitation, and you cannot just say claim that okay, I have done a primary survey and my data is the most reliable data set, and all the secondary data sources that are available are not reliable. You can't actually make that tall claim, because every primary data set has its own limitations. So that is why again I would say that still if there is a chance, try to use this existing secondary data sources and do your survey, do your research. But still, if there is a strong justification that no, you need to go for a primary survey, then you have to take enough precautions that we will be discussing in the other slides. So then coming to the type of primary research, we can have quantitative research and qualitative research using the primary data. And when you go for a quantitative approach, you follow, usually in economics, we follow a quantitative approach. Although in economics also there are people who follow qualitative research. And again, if somebody try to ask a question, which one is better? No, I would have no answer to it. Every research method has its own merits and strength, and it has its own justifications. If you're going for a quantitative study, only advantage would be that you would be able to make some kind of generalization, okay, but not in all cases, because your sample would be, particularly when we do a survey at individual level, we will not be able to cover a very large sample. That is why it might not be that representative, and that's why we may not be able to make a very strong generalization like the way we can do using the NSS data or census data or other large survey data sources. But when you are doing at individual level, since your sample size is small, you have to know, if at all you are trying to generalize, you have to qualify your statement, saying that okay, these are the limitations of our own survey, okay, and the small size, and whether you are representing the diversity of the population, all those things you should be aware of. And that is why, but yeah, quantitative, still we try to establish, even the this year's Nobel laureates have developed methodologies how to establish the cause and effect relationships also. So we can do that using natural experiments, and in fact COVID-19 has provided many such natural experiments opportunities. In fact, that's why people are using data sources of this COVID-19 period. You can have a proper time, uh, it provides you an opportunity that if certain activities are not allowed, then what would be the scenario, and that's how you can compare the data sources. So quantitative data has its own strength, that okay, you would be able to provide a macro picture from
ഫയൽ മാനേജറിൽ പോയിട്ട് ഈ ഡേറ്റ ആപ്പിന്റെ എന്തെങ്കിലും അതിന്
some noise coming from the background. Okay. Okay, fine. So I was telling that in case of quantitative research methods, you would be able to make some generalization, but again with some constraints. And but okay, usually we try to establish the cause and effect relationship in a quantitative study, or at least the association we try to establish with again some qualifications we make. but we fail to explain the process. And in social science research, I would say that process is also equally important to understand. uh, you may say that okay, this causes this, or this is these two variables are associated positively or negatively, but why and how, that answer may not come from the quantitative research. And that in that case, qualitative research approach becomes complementary, I would say, or sometimes you completely do it independently. And this could be in-depth interviews, focus group discussions, case studies, and ethnographic studies. And depending on your need, so for example, economists don't go for ethnographic studies, but in sociology and anthropology, they use the ethnographic studies, and those are really very good, I would say. But there are a lot of things to learn from them. The way they conduct the survey, I would say that if you want to understand the process and document the process that is involved, and but complex relationships can be established only through these ethnographic studies. And then in some cases you have to do in-depth interviews. And in fact, here let me give some example. Say for example, currently we are doing a survey in Odisha, how the district mineral funds are functioning, okay, in Odisha. uh, you might be aware that the mining companies need to deposit 10 percentage of their profit in the district mineral fund, and that money will be spent uh, for the local area development. And so this study now involves both quantitative and qualitative research methods, in the sense that we will be doing a survey of the projects that have been implemented using the district mineral funds, and similarly the people that are benefiting from this project are from this money district mineral fund. But then at the same time, we also need to know the policy, constraints, or the opinion of the policymakers. For example, the elected representative of that area, whether they are involved in the policy making, what is their opinion in this. So that would not be a typical survey. So those would require in-depth interviews, starting from like interviewing the say chief secretary, interviewing the planning, interviewing the development commissioner, interviewing the uh, district collector, and all members of the district, that DMF trust, starting from the sarpanch, the ward member, to the MLA, MP, and so on. So those would be basically in-depth interviews. You take their opinion, and that helps basically the policy, makers, that what kind of corrections can be made, or what kind of interventions we can make to strengthen the existing institutional structure. And but in other case, you have to go for a focus group discussion. And how focus group discussion is better than a simple survey. In fact, what happens when you do individual household survey or individual survey, sometimes people may lie actually, or people may not have also the correct information. It's not that purposefully they want to lie. They might not have the accurate information with themselves. Okay? And in that case, and also in some cases, there will be memory loss. Okay? And this is quite natural. So in a focus group discussion, what you do, you mobilize some people, basically the resource persons of a society, or a group, social group, or a region, and you interact with them. And you try to bring people from all social groups, all economic groups, and all political groups. And when you ask questions on certain things, then you would get different opinions, and so the fact will be verified from the focus group discussion. Because if one person gives a biased statement, then other person may say counter this, no, this is not correct. So there is a greater chance that the reality, the truth may come out. But you have to be smart also to conduct the focus group discussion properly, because in every society there are some dominant people who may still influence the group opinion when they are present. Okay, so you have to be very careful while conducting this focus group discussion. And similarly, you can do case study and ethnographic. Case study means a specific project or a you are there is a specific case that you want to study, so you want to document the entire process, how this has happened. In fact, in some cases, the best practices. Usually, whenever any project is implemented, there would be some best practices, and so there you want to really document. And in fact, there are specific journals where they publish only case studies or the best practices, and in that case, that needs to be highlighted also, like what are the best practices and how. And similarly, in case of failures also, why certain things are failing, and you need to do a proper case study so that a lot of lessons can be learned, and that can be rectified somewhere else. And ethnographic studies, anthropology people live years in different in villages, and they win the trust, and that's how and in fact they observe certain things. See, if you ask questions, people may not tell you things very clearly, but when you live with them and observe things, you will get the clear information. But again, this is quite again resource intensive, in the sense that it needs a lot of time and money also. If you live in a typical village, whether you can do that, all those things are there. Okay, but I would say that every method has its own merit in different contexts, and sometimes this can be also complementary. Okay, and not that quantitative versus qualitative. People even in their PhD thesis, they do in fact they use all kind of data. Some chapters are analyzed using the secondary data, and some chapters are analyzed using the primary data, survey data. And again, to understand the process, people do focus group discussions, case studies. So everything can go together also. It's not that either or. You can do all things together sometimes. So then coming to the preparation of the questionnaire. Okay? So now we know that now we are going to do a survey, and we want to collect some primary data. And in fact, I would be focusing mostly on the household survey thing, because qualitative research needs actually again more time and special discussions, and the analysis method also would need more time. So we will be mostly focusing on the first one, that is, you want to follow a quantitative approach, and you want to do you want to do survey of some sample, and finding out the sample size and all that statistical issues that we'll not also be getting into. But then we'll be basically discussing like how to prepare a good questionnaire, and how to conduct the survey in a very proper manner. And so when you prepare the questionnaire, what things you should take care. First thing is that you should have a very clear objective when you are say preparing your MPhil dissertation, or nowadays there is no MPhil program, but suppose you are trying to have a dissertation during your MA program, or PhD thesis, or you are doing a research project. In everything, your objectives should be very clear. And when I say objectives should be very clear, your research questions should be very clear, or hypothesis should be very clear. And when you say again research questions, you are basically looking at the variables. It's not that only. See, it's very easy to pose a research question, but when somebody asks, in this thing always happens, that when you would be joining for your PhD program, people will ask you, your guide would be asking you, okay, so what are the variables that you are talking about? It's not that only you speak in the open air that okay, these are my research questions, but how will you materialize that? How will you answer this question? And when you try to answer this question, you have to have a clear variable. that you can collect it either from secondary data or primary data. And so first you need to identify the dependent variable or associated variables, or say independent variables, you can say. And if you are trying to establish the cause and effect relationship also, so the variable, a list of variables that you are looking at. So you have to for that you have to read a lot of literature and see actually in the literature, what all variables are used, and now whether you want to add some more variables, or you want to check those variables in a different manner, in a different context, in a different time period, and or in, yeah, in a different society. So all those things you have to justify. And I always believe that, for getting a clear research question, you have to have a very clear framework for the study. Unless you have a clear framework of the study, you cannot have, you cannot identify those dependent variables. So when before you prepare the questionnaire, in fact this comes at a very later stage. So before you prepare the questionnaire, you should read a lot of literature, and you should develop the conceptual framework that you are going to adapt in your thesis or dissertation. And when we say framework, you have already read a lot of theories in your economics course. So you are, either adopting somebody's framework, or you are having your own framework. In fact, you, after reading a lot of literature, you can have your own framework also, because you may say that no, okay, the existing literature has explained these variables, but then they have not factored in certain other things. Then you can always justify that, okay, so in my framework I am trying to put certain other variables and see how this is affecting that, and so on. And so once you have a very clear conceptual framework or theoretical framework for your study, you can easily find out the variables. By the time you will be very clear in the literature what all variables have been used, and whether you are going to take a new variable, or even for the same variable, quantification process is different. Okay, so you have to first of all identify the variables that you want to quantify or collect from the field. And once you are clear about that, then you sit before your laptop for preparing a good questionnaire. And again, to prepare a good questionnaire, I would also suggest all of you that please go through the NSS questionnaire, National Sample Survey questionnaire, or please go through the NFHS questionnaire or the census questionnaire. Those are really the masterpieces. You can't actually really get a better questionnaire than the NSS questionnaire. So follow the format. At least some idea you can get through. Why I'm saying this? A lot of science is involved in designing the questionnaire. Like how can you collect the information in less time, or the accurate information that you can collect. All those things are involved. So when you look at NSS questionnaire, you spend a lot of time, like why this question has been asked like this, why these categories have been used, whether we can have a better option or not, and why do we need codes for certain questions. So when we have multiple choice options, why actually those options, why not other options? So all those things you can learn from those NSS questionnaires or an NFS questionnaire. I'm not saying that you just copy and paste the NSS questionnaire, but you'll get a lot of idea that okay, this is how a questionnaire should look like. Okay, and so look at some good questionnaire, NFHS, NSS questionnaires, and such questionnaires, and then you prepare your own questionnaires. Why actually I'm saying this? In a questionnaire, typically you would have, say, identification of the respondent, and similarly the household information, then individual informations, and then your objective specific variables that you want to collect. And that would be put in different blocks, and whether you will make codes for different options or not, all those things. So NSS uses a lot of codes, lot of categories are used, but you should not go for categorizing all variables. Why I'm saying this? Because when you are, okay, NSS has its own limitation in the sense that a large sample is surveyed, and then they deploy their manpower to collect this. So, and it has to be standardized throughout the country. So that's why they do sometimes coding. Okay? But certain things should not be coded at all. So, for example, age category, no, you should not make in your questionnaire, because if you collect the raw data like age, then you can classify them as per your own need. So you don't have to go by somebody else categorization. See, age can be categorized into different categories depending on your objective. So, for example, if you're looking at the employment, unemployment, then you will always focus on the working age population. But if you are going for education, grouping would be different. No, the children up to pre-primary, then primary, secondary, tertiary, and then technical education, and so on. So depending on, similarly, if you are looking at say economics of marriage, then you would have a different thing, different age grouping. So depending on your objective, you will have different grouping. So there are certain variables which need not be coded at all, and of them age is one. Similarly, income, and of course income is a variable. No, it's very difficult to get the data on income, whether it is for the rich or the poor or the middle class. Nobody really would tell you the accurate information on the income, and that is why in NSS you don't find a variable for income. They give monthly consumption expenditure, monthly consumption expenditure of the household, and then that we use as a proxy for the economic level of the household. And but when you are doing a survey, we try to collect information on the income of the household, and uh, so that need not be categorized. You can do it later. And similar education years of schooling is very good indicator. So whether it is technical education, non-technical education, and the years of schooling, that you can categorize later on. But usually, if you look at NSS questionnaire, they categorize it primary, secondary, tertiary, and all that. But I would say that when you are doing a survey, keep it open. Years of schooling. So you have done post graduation. Okay, it is 17 years of education. And whether it is technical education, if technical education, what is the education that you have got? All those things you can specify, so that that information can be processed much later. Okay, let me ask you how much time I should take. I have already taken 38 minutes. So you can tell me how much time I should take, Kuber or Rhea?
Sir, it's not a problem. I think we do have around
Okay,
20
fine.
minutes more,
Fine. Okay.
at least.
So I can take up to 1 hour, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay, so 20 minutes more. Yeah. Fine. So because we should also have some discussion at the end. Okay. So now once you prepare the questionnaire, and then I told you also like so when you look at NSS questionnaire, you will also see there is option for skip. Skip means, suppose you are asking one question, the answer would be yes or no. If yes, then there would be set of questions, and if no, then you have to skip a lot of other questions. Okay. So suppose you are asking somebody that how much education you have got. Somebody says no, I have not got any education. Then you don't have to ask how many years of education you have got, how whether technical or non-technical education, all that. And in NSS, they would be using this skip option. That if the answer is no, then skip following questions and go to one. So that's how a lot of time is saved. So the questionnaire has been really prepared, and a lot of research has gone into that questionnaire making. Now, once you are done with the questionnaire, you will be now going it. Will be doing the survey. But again, how to conduct a survey? I would say that even before preparing the questionnaire, you should visit the field. Okay. In fact, I remember my MPhil guide telling me that see, I was when I was doing my MPhil, I would go to my guide with a small research proposal, and he would say this, and he would say that this is not clear. Okay? And So you think, and then I would again think for some, a few more days and read some literature. Then again, we'll go to him with, another revised version of the proposal. Okay, this is my research objective and hypothesis. These are the variables I'm looking at. Then he would ask, again some more questions. So finally, I told that no, you go to the field, okay? Because my MPhil dissertation was on the joint forest management and how local communities, basically get engaged in the forest conservation. And so he told, no, you go to the field and come back. Then probably you would be in a better position. And I went to field and came back, and really it was really so much helpful, okay, that when you go to the field, now you go beyond the textbook, or the existing literature that you are studying, and you get very clear first-hand information, and there you will get new insights, okay? And so based on that, you can have a good framework also. Research framework can be, improvised. See, whether you use mathematical modeling for that, or you are using simple, pictorial, form of, establishing relationship between different variables. It doesn't matter. Or you are using simple English. Doesn't matter. Okay, but you should be very clear that, what is the relationship that you are trying to establish. What is the story that you want to make? Okay, and that needs lot of clarity. And when you visit the field, you get very clear, picture. You interact with a lot of people, all stakeholders, and you would come up with really, very good insights. And then all your framework will be, revised, and your variables will become very clear. And then uh, once your question becomes research question becomes clear, your variable becomes clear, your conceptual framework becomes clear, then you can start preparing a code questionnaire. Okay? And remember, I told you that, questionnaire should be prepared at the end. When you are very clear, then only go for preparing question. Unless you are clear about your, methodology, your research question, and the variables, don't prepare the questionnaire. That's also, you spend a lot of time in preparing, in reading literature and preparing the conceptual framework. So once you are done with the questionnaire, then if you are doing the survey on your own, then you don't have to train anybody. Okay? But many times, suppose you want to survey something like, say, 500 households. So there you can use, some people, okay, to do the survey. You need to go to field, definitely. See, nowadays, I observe a lot of people, outsource this service. Okay, outsource the data collection part to some people, analysis part also to some people. I would say that, that is not actually the purpose of doing PhD. Okay, the PhD is all about basically learning the skills. Okay, and if you believe that, all skills can be bought from the market, you can hire the services for everything, then why are you doing PhD? So I would say that, you definitely get involved in the survey, but yes, when sample size is large and you can spend some money, then definitely you use a survey team, so that, you can finish the survey in time, because your PhD thesis also has a time limit. You cannot, work for 7 years. There used to be a time when people have taken 5 to 7 years, or even more than that. Sometimes it used to be 2 5-year plan period for finishing one PhD thesis. Okay, so that should not be the case. I think PhD thesis should be finished within 3 to 4 years maximum. Okay, and so in that case, you have to, you can use some, some. In fact, sometimes some of friends can also join with you if at all they agree. You can provide them good dinner, nice gifts and all that if they don't take money. But if at all, your friends are not agreeing, you can use, you can hire some people, you pay them money, and but in that case, you have to give them proper training, because they will not understand why you are doing the survey. And if the surveyors do not have the clear understanding of the objective of the study, then they cannot ask proper questions. That is why while choosing the survey team, it is very, delicate case, I would say. But now also, when I do project and when I hire, say, the survey staff, I do a lot of, cross checking with other my colleagues. Basically, I hire students mostly, from say universities, and I ask actually, I gather a lot of information about those students, about the work ethics. It is not important how competent you are. It is very important how much work ethics you have. Okay? Because for the survey, if somebody wants to cheat, no, that would be really disaster. So and remember, data, you have to maintain a lot of sanctity with the data, and if you if you're manipulating the data, then I don't think that you are eligible to be a good researcher. So data has its own sanctity. You can use different scientific methods to interpret the data in different forms, but then data should not be manipulated at all. So collecting quality data is very, very important. That is why training the survey team is so important. And so once you prepare the questionnaire, you do a training of the survey team and tell them very clearly that why we are going to do the survey, and again what all manners we would be following, that we will be discussing. Then you go for pilot survey, okay? Because you need to check whether the questionnaire is really going smoothly or not. So do a pilot survey and then revise the questionnaire. In fact, pilot survey also gives you a lot of information that okay, whether you need to revise and where to do the pilot survey, the place where you want to do the actual survey. Okay, that's why you need to go there. In fact, sometimes people do a pilot survey of the survey team itself, that you have prepared a questionnaire and you are doing survey among yourself, but that is not the ideal case. That you can do for one round, but then before finalizing the questionnaire, you should definitely go to the field and do a pilot survey, and then revise the questionnaire. Do a second round of training of the survey team that will be involved in collecting the data, and then you go for the final survey. So that is again. So we prepared the questionnaire, then now we did a lot of training. So we are now ready to go to the field. Okay? Now, when you do a survey, you need to follow certain principles. Okay? It's not that anyone can do a survey and the way you want, just like it's not that. It's not a pleasure trip that you are going to do survey and people are just waiting to answer your questions. It's not like that. And as I told that, you can't do a survey of the elites of this country, okay? Or not forget the elite, even the people, the upper middle class people. You can't do a survey. You go to an apartment, nobody will enter. They will not open your door. Their door. So it's very that's why it's very sensitive issue actually. That when you do a survey, you need to take care of different things. Okay? And first of all, you need to understand the local people, their language, culture, and a lot of other things. See, it's not that in all cases you'll be able to learn the language. That is not definitely possible. Okay? But if you understand the language, it is well and good. Okay? And so if you are doing a survey in a region where you don't know the language, translate the questionnaire into the language the people speak, and the respondents should know the surveyors should know the language of the local people, and that is why sometimes people take translators. Okay? And that is very, very important. So the language, culture, some background reading you should do, so that before you go to a place, you should know. You see, so for example, now this is Dasara time, and now you want to do a survey in this because you have a vacation. You want to do a survey during the Dasara time. That would be inappropriate in the sense that people would be busy in celebration. Now, if you want to do a survey in certain region, then they will not entertain you. So you will be wasting your time, and if some people entertain you, they will be giving casual response. So it is similarly. Suppose some people are observing, say some kind of festival or some other things. Similar election time, okay, you have to understand what is the situation going on there in the field, and then only you should go to the field in a very appropriate time. And then respect for the respondent is the key. Okay? And if you want to collect the data, you need to be so much sensitive to the people. Okay? And so respecting respondent comes in a lot of ways. Okay? Starting from the way you speak to the people, and even I would say that know your dress code. Okay? See, if you go to the field as an officer, if you look like an outsider, they will not entertain you, and they will give all false information. So I always tell my students, the people I engage in my survey, and I tell them that no, see, I'm not telling you to uh, compromise your dressing, but then at least be sensitive. Be it would be always advisable to be one of them. Okay? You cannot, of course. That's why I'm saying that no, you don't have to pretend. See, you are what you are, but then at least you can be sensitive to the dressing. Okay? See, in our party wear, you can wear something else. If you wear that kind of cloth for a survey, that is also not appropriate. So starting from your dressing, in fact, the way you talk to people, that's a language also. See, they would be speaking a different language. Now, in fact, the terminology that is used in the local context, if somebody understands that, that is always well and good. So, using a lot of English, in a rural context, or similarly, you have gone to a state where people don't understand Hindi, and you continue to speak Hindi. So that would be offensive also. So that's why I tell that you should be sensitive, and when you say that you respect the respondents, this comes from these ways. Okay, that and then you have to create the comfort zone. That when you are going to do a survey of a household, you just reach the household and start the survey. That doesn't happen. Okay? You have to meet the people, you greet them nicely, and create the comfort zone. You ask some personal things, whether what did you eat and how are things going on, what is news and all that. So create the comfort zone, and that's why in fact creating comfort zone sometimes take months actually. In fact, so for example, there are sensitive questions like say demographic indicators. It's not very easy to know in the trust. So for example, whether you are using, let's say, contraceptive or not, whether there is a domestic violence. Similarly, there are a lot of issues, sensitive issues. You can't really win the trust in a single day. So you have to go again and again. So for example, one of our PhD students here is working on the transgenders, okay? And so in fact, I never knew the problem of the transgender community. But then when I hear the research work of our student, you have to understand. So it is so complex, to really win the trust, because society, is looking at them in a very different manner. And when you go and ask some questions, they will never entertain you. They will never accept you. So first of all, you have to win the trust. It depends actually, the objective that you have, and so winning the trust, or at least creating the comfort zone, is so important. And that's why this background reading is so important. Okay, that you need to understand the language, culture, the situation of the people, and then only you do your survey. Otherwise, you have to wait. Okay. And be honest about the purpose of your research. Sometimes people go to field and give some false promises. You don't reveal why you are doing research. And see, it is quite obvious that people will ask, why are you doing research, what benefit you will get after your survey, why should we give you this much time. See, you are taking 1 hour or 2 hours of some household, and imagine the opportunity cost of 1 hour. If somebody will ask you to give 1 hour, you may not give this 1 hour to somebody, but you are taking 1 hour of some individual. So you have to be really grateful to that person that he or she is giving 1 hour time. And of course, in return, we will not be able to compensate them, but at least if you can create a comfort zone, they should not feel really bad that this person has wasted 1 hour of my time. So be honest and tell them why you are doing the research. You tell them that, okay, I am doing PhD, and for my PhD, I just want to answer this question, or I want to understand this, and that is why I am here. And they may ask you, okay, so whether after your service there will be some benefit to them, and you have to be very honest and tell them that no, definitely no. Okay, okay. In very long term, if somebody your research becomes so impactful, and committee recognizes that, some policy changes happen. That is very unlikely. 90% chances are there that no change is going to happen to the respondents. So tell them very politely that no, I can't actually promise you anything. Okay? And we are doing research. We want to understand this. We will publish, and that is why many times nowadays this also becomes part of your research ethics. Okay, so questionnaire also nowadays has to be approved in the ethics committee of the institute. I think that has become a mandatory thing in many cases, particularly in sensitive cases. If you have not got the approval of the ethics committee of the institute, then when you try to publish your paper, the publisher will not publish your paper. They will say that no, have you got the approval from the ethics committee? Okay? And without that, nowadays many journals are not publishing the papers. Okay? So that is why the way you ask questions, okay, that ethics committee of an institute basically will ask you all those questions. How are you going to deal with these sensitive issues? So don't give false promises, and try to respect the local setting and the people, the culture, and be grateful to them because they're giving 1 hour or 2 hours of their time, okay, and they could have earned so much of money, at least for their livelihood. And mostly, as I've told, that we are doing survey of most of the time unprivileged. Of course, nowadays we are doing a lot of online surveys. That would be different, but that how many people respond to your online questions? Very few people answer. So that is a very different setting. But if somebody is also answering online questions, you should also be grateful to them because they have spared some time for you, and so it's very difficult. So you should take care of these things when you do a survey. And when you are conducting the survey, it's not that you have to ask everything. Okay? Some things can be observed and no need to ask. See, what is the housing condition of that person? Okay, definitely, you can observe certain things, but not everything. Okay? Because see, in the front house, might be say thatched one, but then behind the second room, third room, would be really pakka house. So you can observe, but not everything. But see, a lot of observations can also happen. So for example, if you want to do a survey of the hygiene practices of the household, okay, then say for example you are doing survey of the water sanitation and hygiene practices was there you need to observe quite a lot of things. So for example, you can ask somebody that uncle or brother or auntie or sister, can I get a glass of water? And you can observe how the person is giving you that glass of water, from where he or she collected that water, and then how did that person handle that glass of water, how he or she is giving you that, where is that water kept, and how clean is that how clean is that glass, all those things. So from that you can observe, okay, that okay, so what is the hygiene practice of that household. And so a lot of things can be observed, but not everything. Okay? And in fact, so for example, when if you are aware of the census data collection, the last census required the consent of the respondent, that you are asking a lot of questions, and at the end you have to get the signature of the respondent. Otherwise, without that, data will not be accepted. This becomes quite tricky thing. Okay? Why? Because I told you in the beginning that when you are asking questions to the people, there are a lot of expectation, okay, that okay, after this survey we may get some benefits, and with that expectation people answer the question. So that would be definitely biased answer response. So in that case, you may not get the correct information. In fact, I have interacted with some of the census respondent surveyors, and they used to tell me that suppose you are asking them the information on the household assets, whether you have a mobile phone, whether you have a television set, whether you have a two-wheeler, all those things you are asking. and the mobile phone would be ringing, but the respondent would be saying, no, I don't have a mobile phone. And what will you do, here? At the end, you have to get the signature of that respondent. And if he says, no, I don't have a mobile phone, but his mobile phone is ringing. Okay. So can you convince him that, no, please, don't lie? Can you really convince him? Sometimes it is not really possible to convince him. But this can, so if the respondent doesn't agree, you will be forced to say, right, no. Okay, one thing may happen that, okay, you can come back to your home and you can change that observation. So these are again tricky things. So one way that, again, you have already got the informed consent from the person. In fact, coming to the consent, I should have also told you at the beginning that when you are going to the respondent, you look at the NSS questionnaire. The first paragraph is about the informed consent of the household or the respondent. So first you are telling why you are doing the survey, how much time this is going to take, what purpose it is going to serve, and if the household agrees, then only you are doing the survey. Otherwise, don't force the household. You have to go to another respondent who agrees. Now at the end, if you have to get the informed consent, if you have to get the signature of that person that these are the information that you have given to me. So this becomes quite a tricky issue. That's why it should be combination of the observation plus asking questions. Similarly, that mobile phone, he might have borrowed from somebody else. Okay? So you never know. Okay? And you observe, but not everything, and verify the answers through different indirect questions. Like for many questions, you may not get the correct answers. For example, income, okay? Income and expenditure. Expenditure is always overestimated and income is always underestimated. And so how to make a balance between these two? So you ask different questions like, how much income, what are the occupation of the family. Even sometimes people don't reveal the occupation clearly. And so then getting information on the occupation is also very difficult. And so you have to ask different questions. So that's why from the very beginning you become friendly, and you ask about their family members, how many family members are there, and then what is the age, what education they're getting. So these are easy questions, nobody would really hesitate to answer. And again, if you are going to certain regions, sometimes getting age is the information on age is very difficult. In fact, if you go to certain backward regions, people will not be able to answer what is their accurate age. They would say, ऐसे ही कुछ भी डाल दो, I am 60 years old, but they will be 30 years old, but they will be looking like 60 years old because they got married at a very young age, and because of malnutrition, they would be looking like that. But then their accurate age would not be that. Okay, so that also becomes difficult. How to get the correct information. Similarly, how many children, the age of the children, they will not also know, because many times people don't understand what is the number. Okay, then you have to verify this fact. When did you get married, and what was the year? Can you tell me some important event of that year? And like that, very old person you are asking. So very, you have to use a lot of tricks to get the information. And again, I was telling that expenditure people will overestimate, but when you ask them, no, you are saying that you are spending this much, but you are telling your income is this much. How can it be? And then they may again correct. No. So so that's how you may get some correct information through that. And sometimes people also don't understand the question clearly. So that's why you have to ask different questions. Then only they would be. It's not that purposefully they don't want to answer. They don't understand the question. So go on asking different other questions through which you can get your answer. Okay, so that's how before you go to the field, look at the questionnaire and you imagine yourself that if somebody asks me this question, will I answer? whether the other person will answer this question. If not, then what, how can I really collect those information from the person? Okay? And no, there are some very good experiences in the field, sometimes very bad experiences you get. And so you have to always understand that you have gone there to collect information. If people are not cooperating, you can't impose anything on them. Just silently come back. Okay? And sometimes people try to get into the argumentative mode. Sometimes people provoke also. It's not that sometimes no, it's not that all the time you will get nice cooperation. Sometimes people will provoke you, that what benefit will get, why should we do answer your questions. Somebody else had come to our village, had said this, they did not know, we did not get anything out of this. So many things, so many difficulties you will face, but you have to learn how to handle such a situation. Don't get into any conflicting mode, and no argument. If you can convince in a polite manner, that is a different thing. But in our case, you have to quit the area, leave, and change your sample completely. Because you can't do any conflict. You can't get into argumentative mode. So, and there would be very nice experience to some places. In fact, people may offer you, lunch, dinner. They may ask you to stay in their home. People may, in fact, develop personal contact with you. You may sometimes help them also in future. That experience also would come. Okay? But that depends on you actually, whether you could win the trust of the people. Okay? If you could win the trust, then everything will go very smoothly. People will cooperate to identify the household. They will narrate stories about their life and so on. So I would say that if you are doing it honestly, and you are sensitive to the people, and you are clear in your objective, you can do a good survey. And yeah, again, as I told, that you have to maintain the sanctity of the data. Never manipulate any primary data. See, I understand people sometimes have their hypothesis, and somehow they want to prove that, okay, the way they wanted to prove it. So if the data doesn't match to the hypothesis, they sometimes manipulate the data. But that is unethical. You should never manipulate the data. And you had some hypothesis, and now you are doing the analysis. And if your result says your hypothesis, you are not able to reject your null hypothesis, that's okay. Okay, and whatever result comes, you just report that. That is perfect. Okay, and but no manipulation. No, sanctity of the data should be maintained. Okay, and you tell truth based on your data. Doesn't matter whether you accepted or rejected your null hypothesis. Okay, so I think no, I have taken a lot of time. I would stop here. This is a photo of Ansuman. Ansuman was in fact involved in a survey. Is Ansuman present? I
Yes, sir, I'm there. Thank you so much.
Yes, I thought I will remind Ansuman. This was a survey that we had made in 2012, isn't it, Ansuman? Yeah, so I just put that survey, and but this also reflects, like, in fact, when you go to village, people may offer you a chair to sit, okay, and it is not appropriate. In fact, if others are sitting on the floor, you should not sit on a chair. If this the relationship becomes somebody is at a higher position, so you sit with them. If other people are sitting on the floor, you also sit on the floor and interview them, so that you are on at equal footing, so that people also trust that so this is person who is not actually not so high-fi, or not maintaining a distance. He is quite comfortable with us. So that's how you can make a good survey. Okay, so with this I stop. We can, I think, take up some questions, and that would be better.
Thank you so much, sir. I think it was a great presentation. If anyone has a question, I think we can begin with that now. Yeah, I think that the floor is open. Yeah, Muskan.
Good evening, sir. So I just had a question regarding sending out your survey and questionnaire. How do you ensure that you reach out to, say, a diverse population so that you're able to randomize for the relevant characteristics? Is there any specific way of approaching them? Is there any source we can exploit to send surveys like that?
You mean that postal survey or through email?
Yes, sir. Like, how do we reach out to? So, for example, if we email, we just reach out to digitally literate people. We're not able to reach out to the comparatively digitally illiterate people. So, how do we ensure, specifically in the online world, that we can randomize our answers?
Yeah.
That
No, okay. Online surveys are no say cost effective, but no, the sample would be really biased one. Okay? So that's why you have to understand what is the objective and whether you are able to take a biased sample or no an unbiased sample. And if your objective is to have a very diverse sample, then I don't think that online survey would be appropriate. But for some cases, online surveys would be definitely appropriate. So, for example, let me give an example. Last batch, when I was teaching my students, I wanted to know the impact of COVID-19 on the households of my students. And so in fact, I asked the students to prepare an online questionnaire, and it was circulated to all Niger community, and some even it was circulated on Facebook, and we got something like 600 responses. And some of the responses were no bogus, in the sense that no people would also do their prank, and so you may have to clear those data, but still we got a good response. Okay? And but see again, when you analyze the data and write, you have to tell them that okay, we could reach out no only to the people who were a part of our class, okay, or the friends of our students. That means it might not be really no representative one. In an ideal case, no, you should have covered all diversity, but you may not be able to do that. So you can still do a survey, but again at the end you have to point out the limitation of your study, and that's why you say that okay, our sample is like this, and because there is constraint, and see nobody will really reject your study, because you are pointing out okay, I have done a study with all these constraints, and these are the limitations, but within that limitations also you can definitely make some conclusion. So it doesn't matter. Okay? And there are a lot of difficulties, like you told that whether you can really get a random sample. No, it's not possible. Many people don't respond after so many reminders. Also, many people will not respond to your question. So yeah, I hope I could answer your question.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
So there are some questions in the chat box. How did the pandemic affect surveys given travel restrictions and lockdown? No survey. See, first of all, household surveys were not possible during this pandemic time, and now some people could do online surveys, but then that is also suppose, for example, again the example that I was trying to make, I was giving, we also included a question whether you had no connectivity issues, whether you faced difficulties in accessing online education. See, that means we are asking the question to the people who are now accessing this online question, and we are asking them whether you are whether you faced some problem. Definitely, they would face problems. For example, if I go to my own village, I can't attend any online classes. Forget about giving a lecture. There is very poor internet connectivity, okay? And so I can't actually attend any online conferences, and so that would be different. Similarly, even within city, we face internet disruptions. Okay? And so, for example, in the beginning, when I was asking a question, even Kuber could not hear me properly. Okay, so those issues would be minor issues. But imagine the people you might have read in newspapers that the tribal kids had to climb on the hill and the top of the tree to get some signal to attend the online classes. Okay, that means we are not able to cover those respondents at all. Okay? So you have to clearly state this in your paper or in your project, that we could reach out only the people to. So this is a bias sample, and there is no problem in specifying that okay, this is clearly a bias sample, or no, the question, particular question, that whether you had access to the internet network or digital platforms, uh, it's completely biased. But then for other questions like whether somebody was affected in COVID, uh, uh, then that question doesn't matter, whether somebody had online access or not. Your question can be answered in that population. Okay? So of course you may say that this is again, so for example, the students who come to Niger, when I had done a survey, those are definitely much privileged section of the society. So you say that okay, we have done a survey of these people, and this is the diversity. We almost cover all states, but then they come from a definitely better of family background. So you can always say that. Okay. Then, is there a standard manual which researchers are supposed to follow or refer for conducting surveys, interviews? In fact, there are many textbooks. In fact, people have written, their experiences. Many good books are available uh, on this primary data. So you can use any standard manual and any book for conducting primary data. Any specific reference I'm not giving, but a lot of books are available. Okay, and but I would say that if you become little careful and sensitive, then you will be able to do a good survey. Please explain something more about ethnographic research and pilot study. The pilot study is basically that you are going to uh, test the questionnaire, okay, and you want to understand the field. That's why you are doing a pilot survey, okay, and it's not the final one. You want to understand the field. You want to check whether the questionnaire is going smoothly or not. And ethnographic study, people live for months and years in the village, okay, and they observe things, okay, and so they understand, say, the lifestyle, the food they eat, the way they interact, now who influences whom, their work pattern, even in different seasons, what kind of changes happen, like when people migrate, and what festival they celebrate, how they celebrate, whether there is a power relation in the village, and so on. Okay, and anyway, ethnographic study I have never done because I am a student of economics, but I have no whatever limited understanding I have. Since I have never done ethnographic study, I would not be the competent person. That's why I told you that my focus was on more on the quantitative part of the survey, not and less on the qualitative part. And many government officials feel quite reluctant to give data to fresh researchers regarding losses and government funding for cyclone. Yes, no, that is actually, that's a tricky issue. That's why I told that when you go to the government officials, again, maybe it all depends. Like you have to win the trust of the people, and sometimes they would also not tell you the truth because of the limitations, the constraints they face. You see, government means they're part of the government, and government has an agenda. So they will not be able to reveal the truth in all cases. So you have to understand that constraint and collect the data whatever is possible. Okay? And yeah, I think that's all. So any other question? Please explain something more about okay, learners.
If anyone has any other questions, we could take it up. But in the meantime, sir, I would just like to say that we also have this thing called the Rural Research Program, where before the pandemic, we used to go to a set of villages to explore a certain topic. And I think personally, we could find a lot of these problems. We should just discuss the challenges. I think some of them highlighted that as well. And I think given all the people that we had in this lecture series, I think we could use some of that. So I think one of the questions that I had in that sense was about ordering the questions in a certain sense. So I think from what I have heard and from what I have learned, ordering questions in a right manner is also something that is important. So I think if you could elaborate on that and
Yes.
maybe tell us how basically we can approach our rural research program as well in the future whenever things open up more.
Yeah. In fact, coming to the ordering question is that, see, there are two things, two sides to this story. One is that how do you order the question in the questionnaire, and how to ask the questions in the field. These are two different things. See, when you are putting the questions in the questionnaire, you are putting it, as different blocks. Like the NSS questionnaire would have, the first block is identification of the household, like who is state, who is district, who is block, village, panchayat, and all that. And then second would be the household profile, like how many family members, who is the respondent, the age of the respondent, education of the respondent, then family members, number of adults, and all that. Then individual information, like education, age, married or unmarried, and then bank accounts, depending on the purpose, employed, unemployed, all that income the people earn. And then comes your objective specific questions. You have an objective, you want to answer that question, so you will have set of questions, and those would be in different blocks. But again, out of those questions, some questions are sensitive, okay, and some questions are people will be answering easily. So when you are doing the survey, I think it is always better to have a conversation, general conversation. But in your conversation, you are gathering all those information. Okay, and in fact, when I hire say project staff, I always send two in a group. Every household should one person should not go to one household. At least two people should go, and if possible, one boy and one girl, okay, should go in a team. And why actually that is important? See, one person is just having a chit chat with the household member, and through that conversation, you're trying to cover maximum questions. You can do that. So in fact, when you go to the field, you will see that the first household you will find little difficulty, but second, third household you will find you are just having a good conversation, and the other person is just filling up the questionnaire. But if you are doing both things, then there will be a lot of interruptions, okay? And you are asking questions. See, it's not it doesn't go in a very linear manner. When you are asking one question, the respondent would give 10 stories to that answer. Okay? So and you have to listen that. You can't stop him, okay? Because that person is opening up, and he or she is saying something more than what you really expected. So in that case, you listen to his or her story and try to collect your information. Of course, you have to sometimes again bring the respondent towards your questions. Otherwise, it will be quite time consuming. Okay? And but then conversation method is the best, and you have to basically order the sensitive questions and easy questions. So easy questions should be put in the front, and then the sensitive questions in between, in a very sensitive manner, in a very tricky manner. You have to put those questions. For example, even I would not feel comfortable to ask the caste of somebody in the beginning, although that caste would be coming in the first block of the questionnaire. When you come to the identification of the household, the religion, the social group, all those questions would come in the first or second block. But I would not feel comfortable to ask somebody's caste. You just went to some household and asked what is your caste. it sounds quite offensive to me, at least. No, if somebody asks me about my caste, no, I would find offensive. So you keep it to the end. In fact, sometimes you may not you do not need to ask that question. No, you can verify this, from other people. Okay, that okay, what is what all social groups are living in that village, and their surnames, the cluster. So from all that, actually, you can also gather information. Religion again. Okay, see, within earlier it used to be that within one household, only people from one religion used to live. But now it is not the case. Now in one family, people from different religions live. Okay. In fact, I have my a lot of relatives who have people from all religions. Hindu, Muslim, Christians are available in one family. Nobody changes the faith, and still they are living together. But earlier the assumption used to be that one household means one religion. No, it is no more like that. Okay. But again, this is a very tricky thing, right? Now, how to ask this question? So some things are quite tricky. Such sensitive questions should be kept to the end. See, family details should be asked in the beginning. Like, okay, how many family members are there? Age of their age of those people, and so what do they do? All those things. The very comfortable questions can be asked at the beginning, and then even income, people will not easily answer. Suppose you ask, the fifth question comes. Okay, what is the age? What is the education? And what is your income? They will not answer. Okay, immediately. So you can keep such questions to at the end. You go on asking other things like how much land do you have, and whether those are irrigated or unirrigated, and what crop do you grow in the village, and so on. And then you ask the sensitive questions towards the end. So the ordering would be again different, not like the way you write it in the questionnaire.
Yes, sir. I can actually highly relate to that because, especially the caste thing that you mentioned, when we went to those villages, it was pretty difficult for us as well to get that question. But I do understand how to go about this now. We do have a better idea. I would ask Muskan now if she can come for the vote of thanks. But before that, if Poonam ma'am wants to say something. Ma'am, you're on mute, I think.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm just using two devices. I just want to thank Dr. Das, especially the soft skills part of the questionnaire execution. I think it's never formally taught. We always talk about what kind of questions to ask, and as Kuber asked, which one should go be in the beginning. But even these nuanced things like how you should dress, how you should sit, most of us are oblivious of those smaller aspects which help the interaction more fruitful. We really thank you for highlighting those particular parts of executing the questionnaire. Thanks for your time, and Muskan will formally, of course, thank you.
Right. So, on behalf of the Center of Economic Research, so I would generally like to thank you because, again, as an undergrad, at least up till now, we haven't been taught all of these skills. And even when we've discussed these have been very superficial, and we haven't spent like an hour or an hour and a half discussing how we have to go about it. So, thank you for spending so much time with us. And yes, I would definitely like to thank Anshuman sir for connecting us to Amrendra sir and making this feasible for us. We're very, very happy to have both of you on this lecture series. So if there are no other questions, we can wrap up for today.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Poonam ma'am, for being present in this lecture, and thank you, Anshuman and Kuber, Muskan, and Rhea, and all who could participate in this.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir. I also learned a lot staying on, and I thank the CER for allowing me to attend this event. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Good night.